Adult Safeguarding Bill 2016, second stage, private members' business. The question is, that the bill be now read a second time? And I call on Senator Colette Kelleher to speak. And you have 12 minutes.
Thank you, Éireann. I'm delighted to be introducing the Adult Safeguarding Bill 2017, and I'd like to welcome visitors from the National Safeguarding Committee, from SAGE Advocacy, and indeed my sisters who are here for the occasion, all the way from the south. In many ways, this bill is a greenfield-site piece of legislation that I hope will become an important piece of the architecture of our legislation of rights, care and protections of people. The goal of the bill is to provide safeguards from abuse or harm, in particular for those who may be unable to protect themselves. It can be thought of as a children-first legislation for adults at risk. It is important to note that this legislation is for all adults, because at some point or other in all of our lives we may be at risk of abuse or harm. It is unfortunately true that many adults across the state are abused and harmed every day. This harm and abuse comes in many forms and from many quarters. Some of those who are abused and harmed have no voice of their own and no one to voice their concerns. Some are physically unable to reach out for help, while others lack the capacity to do so. It is very likely that at some point in all of our lives we may be at risk of harm or abuse. It may not happen today, it may not happen tomorrow, but someday you may be the adult with dementia who's financially manipulated, or the person post-stroke who can no longer speak out, or a person with an intellectual disability who is taken advantage of, or the person whose adult son or daughter has turned their loving home into a personal prison. In yesterday's news reports, we saw the horrific Armagh House of Horrors case, where a vulnerable woman was abused for years on end. This legislation seeks to provide protections for people in these and so many other situations. The 500,000 people aged 65 or over, people living in their own home, people living in institutions, people in nursing homes, people with mental ill health, people with autism and people with disabilities, both mental and physical, are particularly at risk of abuse and require robust safeguarding. Whilst we don't have comprehensive statistics on abuse and neglect, the data that does exist paints a very bleak picture. The National Study of Elder Abuse and Neglect from 2010 estimated that 10,000 older people are mistreated or neglected each year, with 6,000 cases of financial abuse. That study also showed that for the many people who were financially abused, their only income was their state pension. Given that the state rightly pays over $7 billion in pension payments and over $3 billion in illness, disability and carers payments, the scale of financial abuse is potentially massive. Dr. Amanda Phelan of UCD estimates that 32,000 older people were abused in the last 12 months. Staggering figure. We know from international studies that people with dementia are particularly prone to abuse in the community, with rates as high as 55%. The need for a legislative provision to safeguard adults from harm and abuse has been highlighted over several times by various bodies over the last 6 years, beginning with the Law Reform Commission report in 2011. In 2014, RTE's Primetime Investigates programme exposed high levels of abuse of adults at risk in Orsa Tracta, Swinford, County Mayo. This investigation heightened awareness of abuse of adults nationally and the need for comprehensive action and reform. Following the RTE investigation, the HSE published its safeguarding policy, Safeguarding Vulnerable Persons at Risk of Abuse, National Policy and Procedures. This safeguarding policy outlines a number of principles to promote the independence and rights of adults who are vulnerable, and also outlines the procedures to be followed if there are concerns of abuse or neglect of a vulnerable adult. The policy provides for a number of structures to be set up to support the safeguarding agenda. This includes the National Safeguarding Committee, on which I once served. In July 2016, the HSE published an independent review of the Orsa Tracta case. The review called for the HSE safeguarding policy to be put on a statutory footing. It noted the HSE safeguarding procedures are now being put in place and activated throughout Ireland. In order for these procedures to have teeth, however, they are required to be placed on a statutory basis. This would ensure that they are fully implemented. Similarly, HICWA, in their submission last year to the Joint Oireachtas Committee on the Future of Healthcare, noted, "We believe that now is the time to introduce safeguarding legislation to protect at-risk adults from abuse and neglect. While national safeguarding protocols are in place following recent high-profile revelations of abuse, these do not go far enough to ensure the safety and rights of vulnerable people." Last year, the National Safeguarding Committee, chaired by Patricia Rickard-Clark, who is present today, formerly of the Law Reform Commission, published their strategic plan which sets out a commitment to initiate conversations with Government and Oireachtas committees on the development of legislation to include adult safeguarding. In launching the report, Justice Lafoy said there is a significant gap in adult safeguarding. She noted that the need to enshrine in law the rights of vulnerable people. Safeguarding legislation has also been called for by a range of other stakeholders, including NGOs, academics, Oireachtas members, including Deputy Mary Butler, frontline workers, concerned family members, people in the community and self-advocates themselves. It is clear that the status quo isn't working. The HSE policy doesn't go far enough. Staff working in this area have said they need powers to go with the responsibilities of the role and legislative backup to protect adults. There are also clear conflicts of interest. The HSE has too many roles, some of which are conflicting. It acts as commissioner, funder, provider of services, as well as policer and protector. People with concerns have often nowhere else to go, no clear pathway, often resorting to the Public Accounts Committee as whistleblowers as a last resort. That is why I have included an independent arm's-length body in this bill. In my consultation on the bill, I was alerted to many different cases of abuse. I was told about one older woman who was admitted to hospital for an extended period of time and as such could no longer pay her bills as normal in the post office. Instead, she gave her bank details to a family member to pay her bills. When she examined her account after she left hospital, she found that someone had set up a range of direct debits to pay their own bills out of her account. I was told about an elderly woman living with her son with alcohol and addiction problems and sometimes abusive, but a son she loves, experiencing huge difficulties. The Grace case, which we have dealt with in detail in recent weeks, highlights more than others why we need legislation like this. The case, which involved an adult with an intellectual disability, highlighted systemic and systematic failures to prevent abuse, conflicts of interest, poor separation of duties and responsibilities, and a lack of clarity about what to do. With Grace, her life and her welfare falling through all the cracks of our current system. The proposed legislation is a framework to protect people like Grace with clear definitions of abuse and obligations on those who could and would have acted. It creates an arm's-length independent body to prevent and investigate cases of abuse and harm. The goal of this bill is to ensure that cases like Grace or Satracta or many others never happen again, by changing culture and mindsets with people recognising what abuse, harm and neglect is and having zero tolerance of it. It should act as a deterrent and put people off committing abusive acts, with sanctions for those who fail to act. It sets out clear pathways for action so that no one can say that they didn't know or they didn't know what to do. To that end, the Adult Safeguarding Bill does two main things. Part 3 of the bill provides for mandatory reporting by certain professionals and others where an adult has suffered abuse or harm, is suffering abuse or harm, or is at risk of suffering abuse or harm. Part 2 of the bill establishes a national safeguarding authority that will be required to respond effectively if significant concerns of abuse or harm are reported. The authority will have the power to investigate, including the power to enter. It will also have powers to direct the HSE and others to provide additional supports or assistance if required, and this power was much emphasised by those working on the front line. It will also be able to appoint an independent advocate, a key protection especially endorsed by the self-advocates that I met in preparation of this bill. It will also be able to provide education, training and public awareness about what risk looks like and adults at risk, promote standards in the safety and quality of services and provide guidance to state bodies and the Minister, and provide information directly to adults at risk of abuse and harm via helpline and website. This ability to self-refer is an important aspect of the bill. The bill has a human rights focus and defines abuse and harm widely, and these are set out in Part 1 of the bill. Harm includes assault, sexual and financial abuse. Abuse includes failure to act or neglect, which results in a breach of a person's constitutional or legal rights, physical and mental health, dignity or general well-being, and may include ill treatment, intimidation, humiliation, over-medication or withholding necessary medication, censoring communications, invasion or denial of privacy or denial of access to visitors. Passing this legislation will ensure that we make good on our commitment to Article 16 of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which states parties shall take all appropriate legislative, administrative, social, educational and other measures to protect persons with disabilities, both within and outside the home, from all forms of exploitation, violence and abuse, including their gender-based aspects. The proposed legislation is informed by the following principles: the promotion of individual physical, mental and emotional well-being, the right to assistance, support and an independent advocate, the right to protection from abuse and neglect. Interventions in people's lives must be necessary and proportionate, and respect for people's autonomy in decisions and interventions that affect them. The bill, I hope, strikes a right balance between the right to autonomy and the right to protection from harm. I've been working on this bill for 9 months now. In that time, I've been advised and assisted by staff within the House and by over 400 stakeholders from a wide range of backgrounds, including NGOs, academics, frontline workers, families and people who will receive additional protections if this legislation passes. In particular, I would like to thank Patricia Rickard-Clark, the Chair of the National Safeguarding Committee, for all her advice and guidance, and for the self-advocates and individuals who, for one reason or another, would gain protections from this bill, who inform the content and help shape it. I would also like to thank Dr. Sophia Carey from the Library and Research Service, and Melissa English and David Hegarty from the Office of the Parliamentary Legal Advisor, and the barrister who worked with me, David Dodd, and of course Padraig Rice for his invaluable support with this bill and other work. I would also like to thank my colleagues in the Seanad for the political support I've received for this bill. In particular, thanks to Senator Jerry Buttimer, Lorraine Clifford-Lee, Alice Mary Higgins, Ivana Bacik, Mary Louise O'Donnell, Victor Boyhan, Francis Black and John Dolan and Lynn Ruane, who all signed the bill, and others who expressed their support, including Rose Conway-Walsh. It is rare to see such levels of cross-party support, and I would like to sincerely thank everyone for that. And finally, Minister, I'd like to thank you and your officials, who have been very generous with your time and advice, and I'm encouraged by the Minister's support and commitment that this bill will progress. It is an urgent piece of legislation, and I understand that it's complex and involves a number of departments and requires some more development to become a long-term piece of our rights and care architecture. I am therefore grateful for the Minister's suggestion for us to take this bill forward to a form of pre-legislative scrutiny, and I ask for a commitment today that a version of adult safeguarding legislation will be enacted within a year. Finally, I would like fellow senators to pass this bill tonight and to ensure that we can progress it to the next required stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator John Dolan, you have 8 minutes.
Is it right that I would formally second the bill now?